Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of Matthew's Gospel, and we're going to enter the text today, and we're going to read the genealogy. This is Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16. My recurring nightmare that I've had since I was 11 or 12 years old is that I'm scheduled to preach somewhere, and I didn't realize I was scheduled to preach, and I'm thinking as we're singing the song before the sermon, that's okay because, I just need to open a passage and talk about it, and I can do that. And as I open my Bible, the only thing I find in my Bible are genealogies. I keep turning the page. Begat. It's a King James, and it's all genealogies. And over the years, I've taught and preached sermons from the genealogies to try to end that nightmare, but it persists. Genealogies can be preached from and taught from, and there are important things for us to notice in the genealogy of Jesus today. Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. To Abraham was born Isaac, to Isaac Jacob, to Jacob Judah and his brothers. To Judah were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And to Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron Ram. And to Ram was born Amminadab, and to Amminadab Nachshon, and to Nachshon Salmon. To Salmon was born Boaz by Rahab. And to Boaz was born Obed by Ruth. And to Obed Jesse. And to Jesse was born David the king. And to David was born Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah. And to Solomon was born Rehoboam. And to Rehoboam Abiah, and Abiah Asa. And to Asa was born Jehoshaphat. To Jehoshaphat Joram. To Joram Uzziah. To Uzziah was born Jotham. To Jotham was born Ahaz. And to Ahaz Hezekiah. And to Hezekiah was born Manasseh. To Manasseh Ammon. To Ammon Josiah. To Josiah were born Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, to Jeconiah was born Shealtiel. To Shealtiel Zerubbabel. To Zerubbabel was born Abiud. To Abiud Eliakim. To Eliakim Adzor. To Adzor was born Zadok. To Zadok Achim. To Achim Eliud. And to Eliud was born Eleazar. To Eleazar Mathan. To Mathan Jacob, Yaakov. And to Yaakov was born Joseph, Yosef, the husband of Mary, by whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Okay, I need to talk for just a second about historiography and genealogies. We have our own rules about reporting history from the 20th and 21st centuries. And we try to impose them on ancient documents. And they're fine to use when we consider and discern. But to expect a 1st century or a 15th century or a 6th century BC historian to comply with the style book of the New York Times or the Washington Times is ridiculous. The purpose of this genealogy is to establish Jesus' connections with Abraham and David. That's why it says in verse 1, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And so not every person in line is necessarily mentioned, but the line is established. Why is that important? It's important because direct connection to David establishes Jesus' inheritance of the throne of David. And direct connection to Abraham establishes Jesus' inheritance of the covenant of Abraham that is fulfilled in him and that brings us salvation. And so the promise that God made that he would always keep to Abraham and to David are kept in one person, in Jesus Christ. And if Matthew is going to do what we said he intends to do, which is to show that Jesus has checked off all the boxes, these are the two big ones he has to check off. Now, some interesting things about this. It's interesting that the Jews of Jesus' day and to this day consider your Judaism to be inherited matrilineally. That's why Timothy was circumcised, because his mother was a Jew and his father was Greek and wouldn't allow him to be circumcised. But before Paul would take him on the road, since he'd be preaching to Jews, he circumcised him. So they were matrilineal Jews. It's interesting that Jesus' human ancestor is his mother, which makes him fully a Jew in their minds. That's something of a subtext here. But we have a direct connection to David and to Abraham and to the covenant that God made with both men that were eternal covenants. I also want us to notice that at the same time, it checks off all the boxes and it conforms perfectly with the expectation of a first century Jew if he's looking for the Messiah. It also bashes some conventions because it doesn't just mention the men. There are 4 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. We have Tamar mentioned. Was Tamar Jewish or Gentile? We're not quite sure. I think she was probably not exactly a descendant of Abraham. I think she might have been, so we have Tamar, we have Rahab, the harlot, who was a Gentile. We have Ruth, the Moabitess, who was a Gentile, mentioned, and then we have Bathsheba mentioned, but not by name. And I know that some folks who are sensitive to, patriarchal condescension towards women would say, well, why isn't her name mentioned? I'll tell you why her name wasn't mentioned. Because the crime against her is mentioned. Because according to the law, David in taking her, whether it was consensual or not, sinned against her and sinned against her husband, and of course he sinned against her. But in mentioning Uriah, he mentions the sin. If he just mentions Bathsheba and you don't know much about the Old Testament, you don't go. But by saying he had her by another man's wife, remember he had him produce this son through another man's wife. He mentions the sin. So we have foreigners and sinners mentioned. You have some of the ickiest episodes in the Old Testament, and what David did with Bathsheba and what Judah did with Tamar, and then some of the most sublime mentioned, like Ruth. The story of Ruth is the bright spot of all the events of the Old Testament. I mean, there's nothing but joy and love and light in that story. And then Rahab. Is there a greater act of faith or courage in the book of Judges than Rahab's? But we have the women mentioned, and we have their stories told to us, their stories emphasized to us. That's included there too. And so it's not just here to satisfy the Jews. It also challenges them from their own history to see that things aren't as nice and pretty as they want to pretend they are when you look at the Old Testament. And that some of the people, for instance, Jeconiah in Jeremiah chapter 22, or excuse me, Jeremiah 22 verse 35, Jeconiah is cursed from all time, and yet here he is. And he has to be there if Jesus is going to check off the box of being a descendant of David. It is an important piece of the text. It's the important place to start. Okay, we'll talk about Jesus' birth next time. Thank you for joining me what is now nearly 10 good minutes with the Word.